We don't get a Labour government unless we win in East Thanet. So the path to a Labour government and social, environmental and economic justice is through East Thanet. It's important for us to be able to deliver for people in East Thanet. And that means making sure that you come to the seaside and knock on doors in order for us to win.
Hello and welcome to the We Are Labour podcast. I am Dan Greef, your host, and this is the show that highlights our amazing Labour candidates in the constituencies we need to win to form the next Labour government. As you hear the stories and experiences from our candidates, I want you to think, how can you help? What can you do to make the difference? Can you go and leaflet, knock on doors, donate money, or phone canvass voters? By giving a little of your time and or money, it will make a massive difference. This election will be won by Labour members doing our bit to help get the Labour message of hope out to our communities. Let's crack on with the show. Hello and welcome back to We Are Labour. This snap election wasn't known to any of us, but I feel like we're well and truly into the thick of it now. We've only got a few more weeks to go, and I recorded this interview today with Polly Billington about a week ago, and that's a week before it was released on Friday the 14th. And I'm recording this now the day before, on the 13th, because I always like to have this little introduction as up to date as possible. Since, of course, the recording and last episode, we had the whole D-Day debacle coming out. This man is just not good enough to be the Prime Minister, is he? He doesn't know what he's doing, Sunak. Very, very odd behaviour. He just doesn't get how to be Prime Minister at all, it seems. So that was bizarre. And then, of course, we've had the leaders event last night where, of course, they were interviewed by Beth Wrigley from Sky. And then they had questions from the audience. And I thought it was such a difference since the last debate we had when it's head-to-head. Firstly, I think it's better having them separate because it meant that Starmer was able to really give full answers to questions. He looked so confident in that room and so happy to answer the questions from the public. Sunak, on the other hand, looked like a mess. He looked like he's on the run. He looked like he was really on the back foot. He was defensive. The whole thing was clammed up for him. And, you know, it's kind of how it should be, really. With the record that he has in government, it's embarrassing. And going out there to defend that is also embarrassing. So that's the first thing I thought was interesting about that. But I just want to come on to today, before the episode, something that I'm getting a bit nervous about. So some of the smaller parties are now making the argument that somehow Labour has already won this election, and so you can now vote for them. As if somehow there's a rolling vote, that somehow we've already won the election, there's now another election for smaller parties or something. Nonsense. It's all nonsense. No votes have been cast. Always remember that. Don't get carried away and count your chicks or whatever before the eggs have hatched. Because this could go in any direction still, okay? Yes, it's going well for Labour right now, and it's going very badly for the Tories, but there is time. Things can happen very quickly in that time, which completely changes everything. So, activists, members, now is the time to get involved. 2 reasons. Firstly, it's the fact that no vote's been cast. We have to fight for it. We have to work, graft, fight for every single vote, okay? Don't take any vote for granted. And every time you knock on the door, you've got an opportunity to win one for Labour, and that takes one off another party. Okay, so it's really important to be out there to fight for this election now. Get involved in your local campaign, find out where your battlefield seat is, go on to events on Labour Hub, and you will see the events that are happening. Log in, you can see where to go. But secondly, the second reason I say get involved is you want to be part of this. You want to have your hands on this victory if it happens. And you don't want to be the person who sits back and says, if it doesn't happen, I wish I'd done my bit. So you want to be part of that, right? It's fun. You're meeting like-minded individuals. And it's a brilliant time to be a Labour supporter because on the doorstep, people really are listening to what we've got to say. I've been out there at times as an activist where people are not happy with all politicians. Partygate, a good example of that. The MP's expenses, that was a really horrible time. And anyone who's an activist back then, kind of 2009-ish onwards, it was really, really rough being a Labour Party activist or any activist. But also on top of that, we've had sometimes bad times in our own history, which hasn't been great to be a Labour MP. I'm thinking about last general election was really tough on the doorstep. This election is really wonderful to be optimistic and hopeful as an activist, and you want to be part of that. So get involved. If you haven't done anything yet, do it. Do some leafleting in your area. Just get in contact with your party and say, can I leaflet my street? That would be a first step. Get a board up outside your house, because that's a great way to make your neighbours feel like Labour is winning in your area. And people love a winner. They're more likely to support Labour. Make sure you get involved with anything like canvassing, or when you've got like a visit from one of the front bench from the party, and hold a sign up even to kind of big up the numbers around that person. It's about getting our candidates over the line and into Parliament, and we can do that. And in fact, one of the people I want to talk about now is Polly Billington, who, of course, is the star of today's show. She is someone who I have been blown away by. I absolutely love this interview. I knew a bit about her beforehand, but it was a real privilege to have this time asking her the questions. She's someone we need in Parliament, and East Thanet, her seat that she's standing for at the moment, needs her as their Labour MP, because she is spectacular. She's such an expert on the green agenda, and of course how we're going to try and make change when we come into office if we win. But she's also someone who really talks about what it's like for individuals, her neighbours in the constituency, and what she wants to do to make a massive difference to their lives. It's this kind of pragmatic, optimistic Labour message, really, of how practical steps can make an actual real difference to people's lives, to make them more secure, to make them wealthier, and to save our planet. So it's a really inspirational interview. It's the best of Labour, I'd say. Sometimes the Tories, I feel like they're just about shrinking the state and making excuses why things must get worse. This is the complete opposite. It's about how things can get better, how Labour does have a positive plan for change, but also how it's going to be better for our environment. And I think that's really positive. So I hope you enjoy it. Whatever you're doing, maybe you're on the way to the canvas session now as you're listening to this. Maybe you're in actual Polly Billington's neck of the woods, and you're thinking after this you want to go and help. Well, please do. I hope you enjoy this episode and have a busy weekend. I'll hand you over now to Polly Billington. Well, I'd like to now welcome to the show Polly Billington, someone I've known for a few years. Well, she's not known me, but I've known of her work the last few years, and I'm really excited. Knowledge is fantastically insightful into especially green policy. Welcome to We Are Labour, Polly.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here.
It's great to have you on. And you are standing, of course, in a new constituency. So it was South Thanet. It's now East Thanet. How different a constituency is that? Is it kind of on similar boundaries, or is it fairly different?
Well, for people who know Thanet, it means that we no longer have Sandwich in the constituency, but we do have 3 extra wards of Margate. So when you come out of Margate train station, which I know lots of people will do in order to be able to come and enjoy our lovely seaside, if you turn right, you're going into East Thanet. If you turn left, you're going into the next door constituency of Herne Bay and Sandwich. So it's all of Margate, as I keep saying, sort of east of the station, all of Broadstairs and all of Ramsgate, but no longer Sandwich. So this, if you look at a map, for those people who haven't been, if you look at the end of Kent, there's a tiny little kind of nubbin at the end, which is surrounded on all 3 sides by sea, and that's East Thanet.
Right, excellent. So activists going there turn left out of the station, not right. Is that right?
No, turn right out of the station.
Turn right. I naturally turn left. That's just what I do.
I know. It's a bit difficult for Labour members, but
it
think
really
about
is,
it. You turn right out of the station into it if you're going to Margate. But remember, there are 3 stations because there's 3 towns, Margate, right. Broadstairs and Ramsgate. And each one of them has lovely seaside and a very different kind of seaside experience. It's lovely.
Fantastic. So can you tell us, Polly, a bit about your background, but also, more importantly, why are you standing in this election?
Right. Well, I was a journalist for a long time. I worked at the BBC for 15 years. And the shift that I went through was I'd spent a long time working at the BBC, doing a lot of politics and social affairs and so forth. And it got to a point where I realised I was telling people that things were wrong, but I wasn't actually doing anything about it. And that came at a time when I started to realise that some of my colleagues, obviously it's a fully impartial organisation and people don't reveal their politics very easily, but I started to realise that people that I was working with actually didn't think it would be that bad an idea if David Cameron was Prime Minister. And I thought, well, I could end up being the sort of crazy lady in the corner of the editorial meeting, or I could do something about this. So that's when I shifted, and I ended up working for Ed Miliband as his special advisor in government, where we set up the Department for Energy and Climate Change, which was one of the most exciting things I think I've ever done. And then worked on his leadership campaign, then worked for him in opposition before I then fought before a previous parliamentary seat, which I'm sure we'll get into, as well as working for Sadiq Khan in his fight to become the mayor of London. Then, since then, obviously there's been a lot of change inside the Labour Party. I got elected as a local councillor in Hackney and established an organisation called UK 100, which is committed to ambitious action on climate change at local government level. So for the last 6 years or so, I've been sort of nudging and cajoling elected leaders to get on and do more with their powers and responsibilities and their resources to shift towards a more climate friendly future in our cities, because there's lots of stuff, that I did with Ed about doing international negotiations about how you knock out megatons of CO2 from an economy without it falling over. And the reality is, when you're going to shift your fleet from diesel to electric for your bins, for your bin lorries, what are you going to do about your transport policy, which is going to encourage people not to have to use the car? When are you going to put some decent buses in? When are the buses going to be safe, regular, reliable, and clean? All of those things, and affordable as well. Those kind of things, which is the bread and butter of local government, and actually is the way that we will be able to deliver action on climate change. So I've been doing that. I mean, I can talk about what I did before I was a journalist, but since that sort of covers what I've been doing since I've been a grown up.
Well, basically, your life is already more interesting than mine for sure. So let's not just completely embarrass me.
Sorry,
Because,
you did also say that you wanted to know why I was.
Oh yeah. Why you start? Yes,
I think, well, I fought Thurrock in 2015, and that ended up being a very, very close three-way with UKIP, right? I beat UKIP by 500 votes, but I lost to the Tories by 500 votes. Now, Thanet is a kind of has some of those characteristics, because South Thanet, the older constituency, the previous constituency, had Nigel Farage standing here in 2015, and he thought he could win. So we've got a lot of people here who are very, very left behind, and who need to have somebody who's going to be able to speak up for them. And that's why I'm doing this, frankly.
Fantastic.
And then also we have it's a place which actually needs its environment protected in order for its economy to thrive. So I said about the fact that it's surrounded on three sides by sea. Literally, you get out of your car, you get off the bus, and within 5 minutes walk, you can probably see the sea from most places in a different direction because of the way it works. But that means that our environment is vital to our economy. We are a holiday economy, but we need to be creating a year-round economy, which means that we need to be protecting our environmental resources, making sure that they are harnessed for our economic value and economic good for everyone. So I think the short answer is, I believe in social, environmental, and economic justice. All three of those are missing under 14 years of the Tories in a place like Thanet, which has been overlooked for far too long and actually has enormous kinds of resources, not only its environmental resources, its historical, its history, its story, and its people. And we need to be harnessing that for the good of the community as well as for the wider benefit of the country.
Right, there is so much there, Polly. Wow, what a first question. No, that's brilliant. That is absolutely brilliant. But it just means I've got about 7 questions now. So let's go straight into the energy, and GB Energy in particular, as part of Labour's position, of course, if it comes into government on the 5th of July after the election. And the thing that I particularly love, and I know you've talked about this before as well, is that how the economy, social justice, environmental justice, the economy, it all fits in together, doesn't it? I love that line that Ed Miliband has said when he says about we're in the better lives business, not the hair shirt business, because I sometimes feel that the environmental debate can become, with some people, a little bit separate from reality, like it's something that just happens over there. But also, like you just said, it's a local thing too, isn't it? It happens in places, and each place has got different challenges. I mean, where I'm in Cambridge is a very different environment. We have kind of chalk stream issues and environmental concerns, and that way you've got coastal and those concerns, and of course sewage as well. Wow, I mean, there's so many different areas we can go into here. But I do like the idea that with GB Energy, if we can talk about that first, how it is actually about future jobs. It is about how we can try and get an economy change, which is also sustainable, and it's also providing security for us as citizens from places like Russia, etc., but also financial security in our own lives. But how do you then, I guess my question at the end of all that massive statement is, how do you then talk about that with voters? Do people in East Thanet think about it from the environmental point of view? Do they think about it from the security point of view? Do you talk about the jobs that's going to change their lives in the future? How is it best that we communicate that to really make people realize this is actually a win-win-win-win-win-win situation, and that's why we have to do it?
Well, when Ed came to launch my campaign a couple of weeks ago, we stood on the headland in Broadstairs with our backs to the sea and an amazingly beautiful wind farm that you can see on the horizon. And as Ed pointed out, that is a wind farm which is owned by the government. It's just not owned by our government. It's owned by the Swedish government.
A bit like the railway,
right?
right?
So Sweden believes in investing in renewable energy.
Yeah.
That means that our wind resources, which are here in Thanet, are generating power for hundreds of thousands of homes across Britain, which is obviously great. But the money that's being generated, apart from the jobs, which is also great, but the money that's being generated is going elsewhere. Yeah. Now, as Ed says, I've got no beef with the Swedish government. They've done a really good thing, but we should be doing that here.
Yeah.
And when you can see a wind farm, you should be thinking that's great and we get some jobs from it, but also how are we getting the supply chain from it? Are we becoming the experts in providing all of the bits and pieces in order to be able to build the wind farms? And do we benefit from creating that in the first place? So that's part of the thinking behind GB Energy. Now, it will be a publicly owned company, basically to de-risk. Now, I know that's kind of tedious financial speak, but it's important to understand. De-risk renewable energy projects so that private finance will then flow in. And it means that we've got, as a country and as taxpayers and as citizens, we've got a stake in that energy company. So we can see some of the benefits. And one of the key benefits as well, and this is what I've worked on with Ed when we're in government and since with local government, is if you are generating clean, local, sort of homegrown energy and cheaper energy as a result, because you're not having to extract things or rely on Putin's oil, you can also cross subsidize some of the things we really need to do to be able to make people's homes more energy efficient. Now, people will spend a lot of time at the seaside looking if they come here, and they'll see lots of lovely, very, very pretty, very old houses, which obviously are going to be very tricky to insulate in the way that we're talking about. But there are also lots of much more modern 20th century houses and 21st century houses that need those energy efficiency measures as well. So we need to be making sure, particularly for people on modest incomes and social housing and so forth, that we crack on and make sure that we insulate those homes. And I tell you what, it's really interesting. Since we've had the crisis in the Ukraine, since people have realized that we are dependent on Putin's oil and gas, the nods that I get on the doorstep when I talk about energy efficiency measures, where previously people would sort of go to me like, you're talking about loft insulation, isn't that a bit boring? Yeah, it might be boring, but actually, when you start realizing how much money you save and you can keep your energy bills down, that's even better. Yeah, and what I also find is a lot of people are saying, why don't we make every new build house have solar panels? And I go, exactly, why don't we? The only reasons we don't is because the Tory government have not had the political will to enforce that in building standards and put that into the National Planning Inspectorate's regime. We could do that. There's lots of other regulatory changes that we would require. But this is not that if anybody says to me, oh yeah, but there's a rule against that, I say, I don't know whether you noticed, but the whole point of being in politics is to change the rules, right? If the rules aren't working, then you change them. You abide by them until you find you find that there is consensus to be able to change them, to be able to make things better. You don't break them because we know what happens with that. We've seen the Tories breaking rules. I'm in the rules changing business, especially when we need to make sure that politics works for us as a country and as a planet to meet the challenges of climate change, because they're not going away.
But also that rule change point there, the Conservatives actually did change a hell of a lot of rules. So one of our issues locally is water. And in terms of having enough water, because Gove made this massive proposal for all these 150,000 homes around Cambridge, and people are rightly saying, but where's the water going to come from? We have massive problems at the moment with chalk streams being depleted, being dry for most of the year, and it's a real problem. And then a civil servant who's an ex-civil servant here, he said, well, actually, I worked on the papers that made houses water efficient. It was the Conservatives and the coalition, actually, who got rid of it all, because actually housing standards decreased and went down, didn't they? So it's that kind of dropping of standards, which has meant we've actually lost really almost 15 years of actually a head start that Labour started on this previously. We've gone backwards, and that's what people don't understand. It's not just going into the future, it's actually trying to undo some of the damage that's happened. And net zero is something we can talk about as well, I'm sure, in the same way, right? How we do things in the most low carbon way possible, because that is definitely something we have to focus on, isn't it?
Well, they've ripped out a lot of those things, and that's made it much harder for local government. And of course, local government are quite often the delivery body for a lot of these things. And I've been campaigning for a floor, not a ceiling, on building standards. And of course, what happens is the developers lobby their mates in Tory governments and say, "Oh, that's going to make it all very expensive. Oh, please take that out." And that's what we've seen, rather than having a floor, which is these are the minimum standards you should have to achieve, which should be those high levels of energy efficiency, proper stipulations on water provisions, and make sure that you've got those energy provisions in there as well. And the thing is, when you talk to even Tory local government leaders, they understand this. They understand that they've got pressure on their communities about building homes, and the consequences of those quite often end up being these conversations about amenities and so forth. And what they find is that they end up being car dependent, isolated, create more social and economic problems, and so forth. And it's because they're not properly designed. Well, they're not properly designed because the rules actually are created to benefit the developers rather than the people who are going to live in the communities.
Yeah, totally agree. I just want to tap on what you said there about the GB Energy and the investment angle and de-risking. I thought that was really interesting. It seems to me we have very much a debate going on at the moment, and this just seems to be the British way of doing elections: tax and spend, tax and spend, tax and spend. Where's the money going to come from for X, Y, Z? But this is a really interesting point, isn't it, about how to get investment from the private sector into these projects, so that actually growth happens in a way that is better for us. It works for the private sector. I guess the Tories, through Truss, on the other hand, would just say massive tax cuts, and then that would be a way to get the investment happening. But we're trying to work with the private sector in a way that benefits everyone. That is quite a big, bold move, isn't it? I think it is something that could really make growth happen quicker, and it doesn't mean it all comes from taxation, does it? Do you want to just explain a bit more about how that works?
Yeah, I mean, I've been working on this for a long time, because what I found was when I first established UK 100, local government were not really developing projects to satisfy the demand that there was in the private sector to invest in clean energy projects. So even with the difficult regime that the Tories have got on a number of these areas, with the straightforward stuff about generating energy, there should have been opportunity, but there weren't those projects being properly developed. So what you need is actually the development capital, the early stage development capital, to turn projects which are integrated with proven technologies. What I'm talking about: solar panels on roofs, properly integrated, connected up to the grid, EV charging points, all of those kind of things, and indeed, onshore, offshore wind, solar projects, and so forth in communities. Those are the kind of things that local authorities say, well, we'd really like to do that. And then the private sector say, yeah, brilliant, where is it? And it's just not ready. So quite a lot of this will have to be about the development capital to get those ideas, which will have the support of the local community, because people will have shaped them, designed them, thought about what it means for their village or whatever. Then you're more likely to be able to get the money. They will need to be at scale, because private finance likes big bucks, right? They don't get out of bed for small amounts of money. But that's why you need a national company in order to be able to do that support, to be able to get those projects ready. So I've been banging on about this for a long time. I'm absolutely delighted that we now have this investment vehicle on as part of our commitments, and I'm really looking forward, if we win, to being part of making that a reality, because I know in all parts of the country people are desperate to not just demonstrate, but deliver on climate action in their communities, and we will need, and some of the stuff that's now cheaper and affordable and quite easy to do, like some stuff with offshore wind, that's not happened by magic. That happened because the stuff that Ed and Gordon Brown did in government to send a strong signal to the private market that this is what we believed in. So we're going to have to do that again with other kinds of renewable projects and clean energy projects.
And you can see as well why we really need to have 2 terms, don't we, at least, because this stuff takes time and it is about long-term investment. This is huge. It's going beyond the next Labour government, isn't it? However long that is, this is really making a massive change for the future. By the way, when people talk about the environmental crisis that we are in at the moment, I've heard the alarm bells now for years. I mean, obviously, action yesterday is always better than today on this issue, and the second best action is today, so we have to do this. How much bigger a job do we have to do, though, compared to when we left government? What's the situation our world is in now compared to 14 years ago? How much have we lost in that time?
Well, a lot. I mean, we're as a country, we're one of the most nature depleted in the world.
Wow.
So we need to remember that the climate crisis needs to be seen in the context of the environmental crisis more widely, and biodiversity, because actually, and you'll know from coming from Cambridge, the importance of natural capital in order to be able to protect us from climate change is really important, not just in terms of adaptations, protecting floodplains and so forth, but actually creating and making sure that we use our carbon sinks most effectively, that we understand the value of natural capital in order to be able to mitigate climate change as well. So I don't think we should underestimate how difficult that's going to be because of the last 14 years. And some of that is actually about our failure to be part of a part of global leadership. When we left government, we were climate leaders.
Yeah.
And, even when things internationally, those negotiations don't always go the way you want them to, because international negotiations very, very rarely go in completely the way you want them to, because they're negotiations. And that's a challenge because science doesn't negotiate.
Yes.
So you're having to harness the rules of politics in order to be able to meet the rules of science. So we've lost our international climate leadership. We've had shilly-shallying and uncertainty at national level. So that's one of the reasons why I thought, well, hang on a minute, what can I do? Right? It's that sort of thing like, okay, these things, I can't do international stuff because I'm not in government and I can't do that. Other people could, but what's the thing that I can really get into, and where can we make some material progress? So actually, in those 14 years, what you will have seen is some significant progress at local level of ambition and direction, all of those climate emergencies being declared, people shifting, like I say, about how they procure their fleet, who they do that with, doing active travel, establishing higher levels of building standards when and where they can. But every single time I kept coming up against, and this is one of the reasons why I'm standing, is like, okay, I could keep doing this, but actually these rules need to change, and they need to change at national level in order for us to be able to make up that lost ground that we've missed over the last 14 years.
But you know what? I can't really think of anyone better than Ed Miliband in that brief to lead that. He really gets it. Like you said about the world leadership, he was the one on the world stage going to the conferences and having those conversations. He gets it. And I think he also, because of his role as being party leader, I think he understands how the parts all work together as well. That's really important, isn't it? But let's come in a bit more local then. Let's talk now about East Thanet in particular. It's a coastal community. I used to teach in a rural area where it used to really frustrate me how some of the brightest kids there would have no idea about going to university. It just wasn't even a conversation they'd have at home. The aspiration levels in their families just wasn't that of going to university. And also, there's kind of that pride, I think, in a lot of working class families to say, don't get yourself into debt, keep yourself debt free. Then I was a teacher in Cambridge in a school which is a really nice affluent area, and kids who are less bright than those children would say, I'm going to uni next year. And it was just an expectation. And it kind of frustrates me sometimes that some areas in our country, culturally, don't know what it is, means that some kids who should be getting opportunities just don't get them, and other kids just think they should have them. And I'm not saying university is right for everyone, of course I'm not, but I just think we have this real problem with our communities right now and the aspiration that some of them have for what they can achieve. Is that something that you've seen in East Thanet? What do we do about that as a government? How do we help our kids get on in those areas?
Well, I would say that this isn't a lack of aspiration, but I do think it's a lack of opportunity, right? We've got whole loads of we've got what's one of the highest levels of youth unemployment, above the national average, in the southeast, right? So we live in a part of the country which, even when we've got sluggish growth, is generally considered sort of an overheated economy, and yet we're out in the cold. We're out in the cold. And our young people really don't get the benefits of that overheated economy. What they get is higher house prices, but lower wages because of the economy that we've got around here. Back in the 60s, there were pitches for new universities, and Kent was one of the places where they were going to have it. And they pitched Kent at Canterbury won when there was a pitch for a Kent University in Thanet. And I do think
wow.
that could have been a very different situation. In fact, Christchurch University at Kent had a campus for a short period here. Now, I'm not suggesting it's a solution for everybody or will suddenly transform an economy. But what you do get is, and particularly this is one of the things I think I'm looking forward to working with the Labour government, a pathway to different kinds of work opportunities and skills if you design and make sure that that university meets the economic ambitions of the and aspirations of the area, right? So, like I say, we are highly entrepreneurial. If you look at the big employers around here, it's the NHS. Why don't we have lots of big private employers? They've gone. Pfizer left in 2010, 2011, which is a big pharma, which obviously had highly skilled jobs, but they went over 10 years ago, and then have had a little bit more since, but not nearly the same kind of scale. Lots of people have moved here who are highly entrepreneurial. We've got an amazing creative community in all three towns, right? Music, art, performing arts, visual arts, all kinds of things. Tracy Emin's studio is not the only studio in Margate, right? And it's certainly not the only studio in Thanet, because we've got them in and galleries in Ramsgate and Broadstairs as well. Now, that is an enormous amount of energy which we need to be harnessing, and people are setting up schools and training opportunities for people to be able to get to grips with what those kind of creative those creative sectors could offer. But there's nothing strategic or all-encompassing, which means that people can say at the age of 14, I'd quite like to have a go at that. Can I see what it's like? What would it mean for me? Where would I go? And where is the technical know-how as well as the creative know-how? We've got a fantastic FE college based in Broadstairs, but we will need more of that kind of rethinking what the pathways are into knowledge and skills, and the kind of knowledge and skills you need to be able to meet your own aspirations as an individual, meet what you need for your family, and what we need in the community. Because I've been banging on saying I'm going to be an MP for everyone. Politics around here has been really divisive, but also I'm an MP for everyone who's going to build an economy that lasts all year round. If you're in a seaside community, sometimes it can feel like actually you only earn money like 3, 4, 5 months of the year, and the rest of the time you have to kind of go somewhere else. Well, you literally can't earn any money. That's not okay. So how do we create a year-round economy? How do we build those skills? Going back to that wind farm, right? Where else? And we've got a port as well in Ramsgate that is closed at the moment. Do we need to be thinking about opening that up? Where and how we could be doing logistics? Those kind of things, what's required there. So I would always go back and say, this is very rarely about aspiration and much more about opportunity. I spoke to this amazing head teacher the other day who leads a primary school in one of the more deprived parts of Margate. And he said, we make sure, I've got very constrained budgets, but I make sure that every kid gets an excursion every term, because they deserve to see the theatre in London. They deserve to be able to go and experience these things, because if they don't experience them, how can they know what they want to do and what is possible in this world if their lives are constrained by poverty of income and poverty of experience? So I can do something about one of those, and that's what he's doing. And that's why I believe that really passionately, and I think there's a lot more that we can do about that.
Wow, I totally agree with you. And by the way, yeah, when I said lack of aspiration, I didn't mean hopefully a reflection on those families or their background. But I think you're right. You have to see it to know what you can have, don't you? That's really important.
Yeah.
But even though, and I think you're exactly right, people like Starmer actually talked about in these 6 steps how a school that he went to in his constituency can see. The very wealthy area around kind of King's Cross Station, but they are so far from it, they don't feel like they can ever get there at the moment in the situation they're in. So it is exactly about justice and that social justice for them as well. I totally agree with that. What we talk
Well, we've
about.
got high speed rail. We've got high
Yeah,
speed rail, which gets you into London within 90 minutes, which is fantastic, thanks to a Labour government. But that's got to be regular and affordable, and
yeah.
it's still basically a service for those people who are comparatively affluent because of the expense, and needs to. And so that's one of the things I would say, if you're going to have a high speed rail to Margate, Broadstairs, and Ramsgate, let's make sure that everybody can use it.
Yeah, because I suppose the problem with that is it could become the way that Londoners find cheaper properties to live in, rather than locals in Thanet find opportunities in London to work in, and that is a challenge, isn't it? Because of, like you said, the cost. So this is why I find
There's
this
a lot of
interesting.
that.
Yeah, there must be a lot, I imagine. Yeah. So let's bring those two things together then. So Farage did stand there before. We know that the coastal areas of the UK predominantly were much more likely to vote for Brexit, for instance. They're much more likely to vote probably UKIP in the past. And who knows about this election? How is it that those parties are trying to tap into? How's populism trying to answer that question compared to what we can actually do to make a difference?
Right, there's a sort of philosophical answer to this, right? Which is, some people like to understand all the different complexities which might be causing the problem, and some people, for whatever reason, and it's very, very understandable, say, I just want one thing to sort it. And when you stand on the doorstep and say, well, life's a bit complicated, and I know that from having a kind of globalization is good for you kind of conversations, the back end of New Labour, which was not particularly productive, that doesn't help. So I think what happens is that if you can blame a particular group of people in some way for all of the ills, then it feels simple and resolves from your perspective as somebody who's got plenty of other things to worry about. That's what needs to happen, and I think that's what the populists have been doing, and they punch down all of the time.
Yeah.
And I think that's important for us to remember, that we need to be bringing people together, recognizing each other's strengths and weaknesses, and being clear about what the rules are. Because I do believe in playing by the rules. That's one of the reasons why I believe in changing them, because you need to play by them. And if they're not working, then you need to change them. And clearly, at the moment, for a lot of people, the rules of the game are not working for them. They feel like they're playing by them and they're not working. And that resonates a lot with a lot of people. So it's important to say, I agree with you, the rules aren't changing, the rules aren't working, the system isn't working. I'm going to give you some carefully costed proposals to be able to get things a little bit better. I'm not going to promise you the earth, because you wouldn't believe me and I wouldn't be able to deliver, and neither of us would be happy. So sometimes those of us who think about campaigning in poetry need to remember that governing happens in prose. And we're, in a way, our campaigns now are that there's a certain amount of modesty. Why? Because we've tried before, we've said before that we would be able to change everything, and people didn't believe us for a very good reason.
Yeah.
So we need to be very, very careful about making sure that our commitments are carefully costed and feel like they're going to make a difference to people that they will be able to see. And people are actually, quite interestingly, most people are pretty patient. When I say, look, it's not going to change overnight, they go, yeah, I know, because it's a mess, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, yes, we'll double the number of medical school places. That will take some time. We're going to spend extra on the NHS staff, pay them extra in order for them to be able to clear that backlog. That's going to take 4 or 5 years. Yeah. People are not unreasonable, but you need to give them the opportunity to be able to reflect on how they'd like things to be, rather than just a kind of primal scream of frustration. And I understand a primal scream of frustration, bearing in mind what politics has been like for the past few years.
Yeah. You know what? I think this is actually also a redefining of patriotism, isn't it? Because I find the government quite relaxed, really, about water companies dumping sewage on our waterways, and I'm like, that is surely an attack against us as a nation, because nature, our environment, the way we feel about our country. If we're even just dumping sewage in it, that's not patriotism, is it? And it's a new definition of patriotism to say, let's look after our landscape, our communities, our NHS. This is all what's part of being British as well. And we could really make that strong argument, like you say, to bring people together, not to blame or to divide, but to try and unite people as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very comfortable about describing myself as a patriot, right? I love my country. That doesn't
Yeah,
mean I
too
think it's
right.
right. It's right all the time. In fact, one of the reasons why I'm in politics is because quite often I don't think it is right, right, and that's why we have to change it. But particularly when you talk about the sewage and the environment, this is, this is the land which we live in, and we need it to work for us, and we should not be doing that. That's utterly irresponsible, and leaving other people who are clearly not accountable to do it, and then failing to find them, failing to hold them accountable, is just not the way that you run a grown up country. So I'm very comfortable about being described as a patriot. I know a lot of people on the left get a bit icky about it, but it's because I just this is a country I know, and I love everything. I love it, and I know when it's right, and I know when it's wrong, and that's why I'm in politics, to try to make sure that we make it better. But particularly protecting what we value in terms of our environment and driving for better social, economic, and environmental justice. Those are reasons worth getting up in the morning for.
Yeah, for sure. Right, before I go on to some sort of slightly different questions, I've got one more sort of more serious question to ask. That is about the 6 steps and the missions. How would just something from the missions, all the 6 steps, how would that make a real difference to people in Thanet if they vote Labour in the next election?
Well, I've got an Bevan behind me here. Almost all of the conversations I have on the doorstep are either about the cost of living or about the state of our NHS. And it goes to all of the things that we've been talking about. We have got a real profound problem with our NHS services in coastal communities like Thanet. So a lot of people in Thanet will say, it's particularly bad here. And I'll say, yes, it's particularly bad here, but it's not uniquely bad here. It'll be challenging in Lowestoft, in Great Yarmouth, in Blackpool, in
Yeah.
Cornwall, in Hastings, other places which are at the end of the line, and where for all kinds of reasons we've got really quite complex social and economic challenges that end up being the burden of the NHS. So we need to be encouraging and highly qualified, high quality NHS staff to come and work in our communities. We've got really poor health outcomes as well, great health inequalities. So we need to be a strong preventative approach to health. But if I say to people, you'll be able to see a GP that bring back the family doctor, make sure that, yes, okay, if you want e-consult or you need a phone call, you can get that. But if you need to see somebody face to face, you can do that. Those kind of things, which are frankly just seem like the basic things you should be able to offer. I know they're not going to be easy, right? I
Yeah.
reported on the failings of the NHS in the new Labour years, and I remember when people were complaining because they couldn't get an appointment in a month's time because they had to get one in
That was that
48
was on Question Time. Do you
hours.
remember that? They showed that
Yeah,
recently, and it's
I do.
shocking to think
And
people are
and
saying,
Tony
why should
Blair
I have
was
an
like,
appointment the
I
next
don't
2 days?
understand that. No,
It's
Tony Blair
weird.
was like, I don't understand that. But that's one of the things that Wes is going to have to deal with, because there are some extraordinary perverse incentives you can establish in the NHS. But
Right.
the NHS that Nye Bevans established was for people for 80 years ago, right? It's nearly 80 years since we established that. The changes that have happened in our country and in our society mean that we need a different kind of health service. So yes, this will be about making sure that we spend that money from the rich non-doms and the private equity people on speeding up those, clearing back those waiting lists and getting us to get some more GPs in. But also, frankly, this will be about some significant change. And I know that staff are on their knees and they're so demoralised and they just roll their eyes and say, don't give us any more change. But they also know what's not working. So Wes
Yeah.
has talked about stop the stupid stuff. We'll be listening to staff a lot about what the stupid stuff is, so we stop it.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so in that case, imagine that you are elected and one day Prime Minister Starmer asks you to serve in some way, shape or form in his government. In which department then would you be interested in mostly in serving, and why?
Well, obviously we've been banging on a lot about the environment in this conversation, right?
So it's
So it
too
would be
obvious
daft
now,
for me
isn't
to
it? It's
say,
too obvious.
so,
You have to
so
say
it'd be
something
daft
totally
for me to
random.
say to not say Department of Energy and energy security and net zero, which is obviously one of my passions and something that I've worked on for a lot of time. But I think the key thing is net zero will apply to lots of departments. It's not something that can actually be contained within one department. What are you going to do about the prison estate? What
Yeah.
happens with the school estate? How do we design communities, which will be in the DLUC department and in planning, in order to be able to build in net zero activity right from the start? Those things. And I'm also highly aware that there are things that I feel passionately about and really important for our community. Violence against women and girls. We have got quite high crime rates here in Thanet, which a lot of it is contributed to by domestic abuse. So I wouldn't turn down a job, I can tell you, if I had the opportunity to do that. And of course, what I was talking about with the creative industries. The creative industries and DCMS are so vital, and that people sort of think of them as, when some Tory minister described it a long time ago as the Ministry of Fun. It's like, yes, it is fun, but actually it's about our well-being. It's so important to the human condition, and it's vital for our economy. So, bring it on. I'm very happy. Obviously, I will serve anywhere that Keir wants me to. And I'm going to be a very loyal backbencher and do what I absolutely can to make sure that Thanet gets what it needs. That from the police it needs, from the GPs it needs, all of those things. I believe passionately that communities like Thanet really do need to be given a better chance. And that's why I'll be working with my colleagues who are also going to win in coastal communities to make sure they have a proper coastal community strategy. And that may well be working out of DEFRA. So I know I've hit a lot of nails
Wow.
on that one,
Great.
but I couldn't, like I say, there's lots of things that can make a difference
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
the Labour government, and also particularly to Thanet.
You know what, though? The whole mission approach I like, because it is about joining up the departments to get a final goal achieved for the country. I think that's really important. It's not the education department's mission, the DEFRA's mission, the Foreign Office's mission. It is one
Yeah.
mission, and they all work together to deliver it. And I think that is so important. And of course, green
Well, especially the
issues,
preventative health one. The
yeah,
preventative health one
yeah,
says we need to have better jobs, better houses, and a better environment. Clean
yeah,
air and
yeah,
clean water would be
yeah.
quite good.
Daniel Zeisler was talking about that exact thing. He said, health is such a big part of the DEFRA brief and prevention
Totally
of
is.
illness. Yeah, exactly.
But
Okay.
but the economy, when we've got sewage dumping, it has a direct impact on our small businesses because people don't
Yeah.
want to go in the sea. Somebody literally said to me, "No, who wants to kayak through crap?"
Yeah.
Good
Ed
point.
Davey. Ed Davey. Anyway, he never thought he was going to get mentioned on this podcast. Okay, now the fun question I've got for you, Polly. Then imagine now that it's a bit down the line and you're established as an MP, and Radio 4 gets in touch and they say, we'd like to come on Desert Island Discs. What one song would you take on with you and why? And just before you answer that question, this will be joining my Spotify playlist, Win Doorstep 24, and that's basically there for activists to listen to as they're leafleting. So your song will be listened to by lots of activists, and they might bring up at conference or whenever they see you. Who knows?
It didn't take long. I mean, for me to think about this, the one that's particularly in relation to my politics, why I do this, and why I want to be able to do more of this. It's got to be Dolly Parton's "9 to 5."
Oh, great!
Right?
Oh, wow,
It's
yeah.
it's it's a great song. Makes everybody want to dance to it, even my wife, who doesn't really like dancing. Right? um, it's and it's and the lyrics are absolutely brilliant. If anybody who has had a rubbish job or been overlooked or demeaned or patronized or anything at work, they can feel her passion and her experience in that song because they've lived it too. And I highly recommend anybody who hasn't seen the film to see the film too, because what we have left, right, to be that floor filler is the song, but the movie is amazing too. Get that on your Spotify podcast for doing your leaflets,
It'll
and
be
it will
there.
remind
Done.
you. Yeah.
Done. I'm a massive fan of Dolly Parton's. I never really was in the past, but I saw an interview with her where this journalist was being so patronising, and Dolly Parton had the wit, the sort of the brains, but more importantly the dignity. And I thought, this woman's incredible. And actually, like you say, her songs are really powerful. They are really deep, aren't they? And yet she's not taken seriously, which she hasn't been in the past. Well, thank you so much for all of this today, Polly. There's just one last thing I need to ask, really, and that is, how can our members get involved in your campaign? Where is it best for them to help? Is it a place to donate money, to turn up in person, to canvass on the phone, whatever it might be? This is your chance really to speak to them directly and get them to get involved. So how can they do that?
Well, if you're in a part of the country a long way away from Thanet, obviously it'd be fantastic if you could donate. So the best way of doing that is emailing me at hello@pollybillington.org.uk, and I can share the details. But if you are within striking distance of Thanet, and let me tell you that high-speed rail delivered by a new Labour government means that if you live in London, and that's a quarter of the Labour Party's membership, you are within 90 minutes of being by the seaside. And this is the thing that we can offer that many other constituencies can't, which is a July election in the sunshine with the seaside, with some of the best fish and chips in the country and some of the most amazing ice cream and some very, very lovely fun places to go afterwards. So I would highly recommend at least a day, if not a couple of days, at the seaside of either Margate, Broadstairs or Ramsgate.
Just turn right out of the station, guys. Turn right. Okay.
Turn right out of the station at Margate, and the other ones. The other ones are slightly more complicated, but that's the one you need to know in Margate.
Just turn right. That's where the best ice cream is, the best candidates, everything. Everything's going on to the right. Anyway, okay. Well, thank you so much for today, Polly. I have really thoroughly enjoyed our conversation today. You're bringing so much knowledge and experience into this, and I really hope that you are the MP for East Thanet, and that we see the transformation that our whole country needs, because this is a national crisis we're in right now, and I think Labour has the answer as well. I know it does, and I'm really excited to know you're going to be part of that. So thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you.
Before I go, may I ask a massive favour? Like this podcast and smash that subscribe button. Leave a review. Share this podcast with other Labour Party members, your CLPA executive, and anyone who, like us, wants to fight for the next Labour government our country so desperately needs. If you're a candidate and wish to come onto the show, then email me at labourpodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, bye for now.